Hi everyone, I'm just waiting to get set up before we start. Hello? Okay. All right, I think we'll get started. Um, Hello everyone, my name is Girish Venkataramani. I am the head of ML deployment at Cruise Automation. Cruise is, if for those of you who don't know, Cruise is a company that's working on self-driving cars, and I lead an engineering org at Cruise to enable us to get those algorithms and models to be in the car, and which makes the decisions on how to drive the car. So it's a very interesting role and a great opportunity. So I'm very happy to be here. So I want to thank SEF for inviting me to give this presentation. And when they reached out to me and asked me to give a talk at this forum, I was thinking about what to talk about. It seemed like a very good opportunity. I asked SEF who the audience is, what they do, and I heard that most of the audience is um, either students in undergrad, finishing up college, or about starting a career. So it's a really good opportunity to. I'm very thankful to be able to connect with you all, whoever's listening, and want to share with you some of my experiences. So I thought about what to talk about. I could have talked about a technical topic. I could talk about AI or ML all day long. I can talk about self-driving cars. I can talk about all these things. And frankly, like that's something you can learn from so many other resources. And I'm sure it would have been fun to talk about. But I choose to talk about existentialism in the tech landscape. What does that even mean, right? The way I see it, technology has started to completely engulf our lives today. So you and I'm in the technology domain, and I build technology, and I'm acutely aware of its impact on society. But also the impact on you and me as we kind of grow our careers in this area. And so with this really fast-paced changes and really fast-paced growth in technology, I think it's really important for us to understand how we engage with technology. I mean, as a technologist in my career, I've gone through a lot of interesting stages, and I really feel that it is so easy to get lost in this market, in this domain. It's easy to lose your way. It's easy to be having an identity crisis of sort, and easy to get burnt out, right? Like this is so fast paced, and there's so much that is going on. It might sometimes feel overwhelming, and you just get completely burnt out, and that happens a lot. So how do we kind of manage this? And Throughout my career, I've kind of connected with some approaches to how to engage with my life, and the technology around what I do. And today I'm talking about existentialism in a little bit and how that has helped me manage these expectations. So I'm going to share with you my journey through the last 20 years or so and how I've been managing my career, my growth, and I want to share that with you with the hope that as you start your careers, um, maybe one or two things from these presentations will stick out and it'll help you, it'll guide you in your in whatever bright future you're walking into. All right, so let's get started. So who am I, right? So um, I grew up in Bangalore, in India. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and it was a great time when things were a lot simpler. So Bangalore was an interesting place in itself. It was just starting to grow up. Like so, 90s was, if you remember, that's when actually tech boom in India really started. It really took off in the 90s. So but when I was growing up in India, I was really more interested in many other things, right? Like one of the things which fascinated me, which maybe a lot of you might connect with, is cricket. So I played a lot of cricket. I watched a lot of cricket. I played. I joined club for a while. I really thought I would, go on to play professional cricket. Um, well, it didn't happen. I wasn't as good. So cricket was a pretty big part of my life growing up, going through middle school, high school, and whatnot. And from there, cricket clearly didn't pan out. So I turned to see what was going on. And in the 90s, like I said, the tech industry was starting to take off. I was very interested in computers myself. I had like this old style computers. Even this is even before the internet was a thing. And I used to play these games, and I used to be like fascinated with how a computer can actually play a game, like what what makes that game play on the computer. So it was very interesting to me to kind of think about it and check it out. From there, I went to BITS Pilani. That's where I went to college. Oh, by the way, I wanted to just let everyone know. Please do keep asking questions. I don't want to make this a one-way presentation. So if you have any questions, please do ask me. I'm happy to chat about it. So I went to BITS Pilani from there, which is a pretty good college in India. I stopped playing cricket altogether there, and I took on footballs, or soccer as it's called in the US here. So, football, I played a lot. I played for my college. I really didn't, college is such an exciting time. I love my days in Bijpalani. We had met a great group of friends, and we are still very close friends. It was also a big party time, so I drank a lot of beer and we had a lot of parties. It was an extremely fun 4 or 5 years in college, and I really cherish my memories from there. I'm still very close with a lot of friends of mine and whatnot. So that was bits, and I spent those 4 or 5 great years. I really didn't have a good sense of what I wanted to do next, right? Like, so I was wondering about it, and I really didn't have any gut intention of like, this is clearly what I want to do. So after Pilani, I looked around and I took on a job, I think, for about a year or so. But soon I wanted to travel. So one way I figured out how to travel is to get into grad school, and I was able to fortunately get into graduate school in the US with financial aid and whatnot, so which allowed me to come to the US. So back in late 90s, I moved to Colorado State, which was another party school. So I went there, and it was a lot of fun. I'm in my early 20s, a lot of drinking beers and meeting with friends and whatnot. So it was a great time. That was my first year in the US. But also something very important happened in Colorado. I took a class with a great professor, right? Like a professor who was teaching compilers, a course on compilers at that time. And that's when I first fell in love with compilers. So keep in mind, this is really important. You've got to be learning from the right people so that you feel inspired. I'd taken compiler courses back in Bits Pilani, didn't seem to affect me too much, but when I learned compilers from this particular professor, it really fascinated me. And that was the first time I fell in love with compilers. And since then, for the last 20 years, I've worked on compilers, I've built many compilers, and it has propelled my career personally. So it's a very integral part of my professional life, and it started here in Colorado State. So I stayed in Colorado State for a year, and then I moved on to another university, UC Riverside. This is in California. Again, I continued to work on compilers, but I also was still in college, and we were partying. And this time, I took it to another level. I brewed my own beer. Clearly, you can see I like beer, so I used to make my own beer. That was a big part of my social life at that time with my friends and whatnot. So it was a really interesting year in UC Riverside. I got my master's in computer science at Riverside. And from there, at that time, was when, if any of you remember, we had the dot com bust, right? Dot com was like a big thing in the late 90s, and around 2000, 2001, the market crashed and things were not looking great, right? Like, so as we've seen recessions in the past, this was like one minor recession. So I went on to do my doctorate. So I decided I'm going to keep in grad school, and from there, so I moved to Carnegie Mellon University, and that's where I continued my love with compilers to get my PhD. And here, my compilers focus has always been on like looking at very exotic architectures, and compilers in some way kind of quenched my thirst in trying to understand how the computer works, because in order to make the computer work, you need a compiler. So it was a pretty integral part of my journey through a grad school. I got a PhD in computer engineering, but at the same time, I did a lot of other things, and I think that is really important to who I am today. I picked up a game called squash, so I'm no longer playing cricket or soccer. I played a lot of squash. I love squash. I still play squash, and it's been what keeps me balanced in life in the end of the day. I also started to do yoga, which is again a pretty big part of my life today. Yoga and squash go well together because it's very physical. One is very active, and the other is it's like the yin and yang of our physical being, right? And another thing which I did a lot of in grad school, I was there for 6 years, did a lot of traveling. I met my first wife at that time in during my PhD. We traveled a lot. We traveled to the Caribbean, the Europe, and Asia, and whatnot. So it was a great time. And travel to me is so crucial to the well-being of your personality or your essence. I feel like travel exposes you to so many different cultures and to so many different ways of doing things. You that, at least for me, it broadened my horizons quite significantly. So from there, I graduated with my PhD, and I took on my first job. I went to a company called Mathworks, and some of you might know of Mathworks. They make the language called MATLAB, a scientific computing language, and very widely used. And it was a great time because my first job, I went there to build a compiler for compiling MATLAB to these very exotic architectures, something called FPGA. So you might not have heard of it. Not important. That was like my first big project, like build a compiler to map MATLAB to this very exotic chip. And we did that, and it was like a great experience. And soon I started to get into what is called GPUs, which a lot of you might have heard of. It's used in gaming. GPUs have propelled technology into the next stage. A lot of that came from NVIDIA. So I started looking into GPUs and was very interested in programming these beasts of compute engines. and I built compilers to compile MATLAB to GPUs. It's a very exciting time at Mathworks, and I built a new product there. Was able to launch the new product. Really exciting journey. But at the same time, on the other side, on the non-professional side of my life, if you will, continued my journey with yoga. I started going to yoga retreats because it fascinated me, and I got certified as a yoga teacher in the meantime. But I also a big changing point, a turning point in my life was when I started a meditation retreat. This was probably about 11, 12 years back in Thailand. It was a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and I knew in the 10th day that it's changed my life somehow. And it was such an important turning point in my life. I remember that my engagement with my job, my career, my people, my family, my friends, everything changed from that point. It was a very big part. And I'll come back to the meditation because it's related to some of the things I want to talk about. So from there, I was in Mathworks when artificial intelligence or AI started to take off. This was around 2014-ish, right? Like about 6 years back. Technology started boom. I was super excited about this. We built this product to target AI onto GPUs using MATLAB. Built a product, shipped it. It was one of my biggest accomplishments in my life, and I really cherish the memory there. But from there, I wanted to move on, explore more things. So I moved to NVIDIA. And NVIDIA is a great place. It's a leader in AI hardware. And I was working there with a lot of exciting and very super intelligent folks, and really enjoyed leading a compiler team at NVIDIA. I was there for about a year, and then finally I moved to Cruise Automation, where we are building self-driving cars. So here we are putting all this AI technology to use, and this is like kind of like the most challenging problem of our generation. This is like the biggest unsolved problem. How do you drive a car without a driver? And so the technology is just addictive to be part of. So I'm really glad to be where I am, and I'm very when I look back, I really like this journey that I've taken. So from here, let's talk about this. This has been like a 20-year journey for me, like this whole process. And in this 20 years, a lot of things have happened in the tech domain. So if you look back, each of these things have presented an upheaval of sorts, right? So first big thing that I remember in my life is when internet became a thing, right? Back in the day, I remember we used to still write letters to each other and go to the post office and mail them. Didn't have to do that anymore, right? Like, and it was a big change to even how I was working. So I was doing my PhD at this time. Before the internet, you would have to go to the library and pick out the publications, get the papers, take it back. It was much slower, right? Like internet really sped things up. And with that came mobile phones started to become a thing, like late 90s. Before that, I had to wait in line in college when I wanted to talk to my family. I'd have to wait in line for my turn to make that phone call back home. You didn't have to do that anymore once you got the mobile phones. So it was a pretty big change in the market, right? And Wi-Fi became a thing, right? So you could now use mobile devices, and you could use it anywhere you wanted. And all these things together, the combined impact of that is much higher. Kind of like jumping ahead a little, Netflix. Why am I talking about Netflix, right? Netflix streaming specifically. Netflix streaming was like a disruptive technology. It changed how we were watching movies. We used to go and rent out a videotape or a DVD from a video store and watch it and go back one day to return it, and you'd return it late, you'd get a late fee. Now you have streaming, and once streaming came, it completely killed that industry. Why am I saying all this? Because they all combine, and by their impact is that you have to change the way you're engaging with your technology or society. Around the same time, Facebook started taking off. Big change, right? So Facebook, the first social, I mean, the first social computing, social networking company that really took off, and now we have so many of them. It was like it was a trailblazer in that sense, right? Like whatever we think of Facebook today, this was they started a market which was not there. And it's again unique because it changed the way I think of my job, or when you graduate, what you want to do depends on this new technology that was born, right? So yeah, and then finally smartphones. So Apple introduced iPhones around the same time. So 2007-8 was a pretty pivotal year in that sense. So with smartphones, the internet and Wi-Fi and social networking, it all came together that smartphones were a thing. Wait a minute. So I see a question here. What is your opinion on rule-based AI versus deep learning-based AI in the application of self-driving cars? Great question. They're both important. I think, as you'll see, deep learning-based AI is trumping things more and more. There are still applications where you might want to use rule-based AI, but deep learning is becoming the de facto AI techniques that are being used in self-driving cars. Thank you for your question, Akshika. So moving on, so that was like 2007. Then more revolutions started happening. Internet of Things, like your home is now connected. And this happened because of mobile technology and because of all the other things which happened before. Cloud computing. A lot of companies missed this boat, right? Like things started moving to the cloud. Your data is in the cloud, your compute is in the cloud. You don't need a computer anymore. You could use the computer in the cloud. And this changed the way that companies and enterprises did business. A lot of enterprises tried to resist this change. And when you resist a change like this, you get left behind. And I've seen that even in the companies that I've been in. So it's really important to stay up to date with technology in this sort, and all of these technologies are dependent on what came before. And of course, around 2014, AI really took off. And today we have so much technology that is reliant on AI. Healthcare, industrial automation, self-driving cars, you name it. Like these are just a few of many, many new technologies that AI has facilitated. So what's my point in this? So the point is that in 20 years, the world has changed to something that I would have never anticipated 20 years back. And it affects all of us. It has affected the choices I made in my job, in my career. It has affected our lives as how we engage with each other in society. So it is really crucial for us to stay connected, right? And think about it, like if we step back and look at the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people believe that we are in the fourth revolution. The first one was the steam engine, right? Like the trains became a thing because of the steam power. And then electrical energy, the light bulb and cars, automotive and large industrial production started to become a thing in the late 19th century. Computers was a third revolution when computers first came onto the scene, right? Like this was around 60s. And now we are in this cyber physical AI, IoT era, right? And the pace of innovation, which we have seen in the last 20 years, which is this fourth revolution, is so exponential that it is really critical for us to stay up to the beat of the market. And that's what gets challenging. How do you stay up to the state of art? It's like it's what keeps me up at night many times, right? So this is interesting. So there is a few ways to look at technology, right? These are revolutions which have happened in the past. And I claim that a revolution is essentially a disruption. And disruption is an interesting word that is being used a lot in the market. So Harvard Business Review, I encourage you to check it out. They wrote a couple of great articles about disruptive technology. What a disruptive technology is when you render another existing player in the market completely useless. So Netflix streaming was a disruptive technology. Like DVDs and videotapes are gone now. It disrupted the market. iPhones. Before iPhone was introduced, I remember Nokia, Samsung, these were the phone companies which were doing great. And then smartphones came along and everything was gone. So disruptive technology. A revolution, by definition, is an upheaval of an existing kind of status quo, right? Like you're dismantling the status quo and you're bringing in a new leadership. And that's essentially what disruption is. And we are in the age of disruptive technology. Everywhere around us, every year, we see disruptive technologies coming up and replacing the elephants who have, or the dinosaurs who have been in this market for a while and have been milking the revenues in these markets. So it's really critical for us to know if we are in one of these dinosaur companies, which is going to get disrupted, or are we part of this new startup which is disrupting the market, right? Like in today's world, we have to keep up with this technology. So that's kind of where we are. And how should we process this? This is a question that I've thought about a lot. And you can learn, like when you're in college and you're learning all these things in college, it's really important. You should continue to learn that. It forms a foundation. But that your learning doesn't stop there. And there's a really nice quote from Alvin Toffler, who's an architect and a technologist and a philosopher, who said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Which means in the sense that you have to adapt and keep learning and keep yourself up to speed with what is happening in the state of art. And if you think about what Alvin Toffler said, to me, this is essentially what Darwin said, right? Darwin said this about our species as a whole. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, but not the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. And essentially, this is what the animals of a tech jungle need to be aware of, right? Our adaptability. How adaptable are you to the changes that are going on around you? And this is one of the strongest traits. If you want to take anything away from this talk, think about it. Adaptability and ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? All right, so moving on. So that's about technology itself, right? Technology itself, just keeping up with it is hard in this industry, and in your professional lives, you'll see that it's a thing. But at the same time, there's also the individual's experience, my experience. I want to share some experience with you. Of course, keeping up with disruptive technology is the first thing. I mean, I myself, I'm a compiler engineer. We used to build compilers up from scratch back in the day. Today, there is a lot of tools available which can give you a compiler very quickly if you want to make a custom compiler. The programming languages have changed. GPUs became a thing. AI became a thing. All those revolutions we talked about, of course. Big part of my experience. But of course, in the end of the day, when we talk about a career and a job, you're going to be working with engineers, with people, and these people tend to have opinions too. So I have a question out here. What do you think is the best way to become more adaptive as a person? That's a great question, Akshika. There's no one answer, right? Adaptability is about, there should be an intention. I'm going to talk about this. So if you want to hold your question, it comes with curiosity and a sense of adventure. When you have that sense of adventure and a curiosity for the world, you will automatically become more adaptive. If you're stuck with what you know and you could be an expert at it, and if you're stuck with what you know and you hold on to your knowledge dearly, nearly and dearly, you're going to not be as adaptable. You're going to be very rigid. So let yourself be flexible and let yourself be curious. I think that's a key to adaptability. People and opinions, coming back to the slide, why do I talk about that? A lot of times, like when during my career at some point, I remember I was a manager and I was talking to this new person in my team, and he was talking about managers and engineers and how engineers are so different from managers. And we kept talking, and then I said, hey, you know what? Engineers are people. He realized that, right? Engineers are people too, and as people, you will have opinions, you will have all the faults and the strengths that come with humans and people. So remember that you are dealing with people, even if you're in the technology, if everything looks super objective, even so, you are dealing with people. So it's really important to remember that. And so, with that, dealing with people, how do you engage with people? And I believe, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, compassion is a pretty big part of it. You got to develop a sense of compassion so you understand the other person's experience, understand their experience when you engage with them. You're going to have times when you have conflicts, you're going to have times when you have a big argument. So many different scenarios pop up. Like you'll have people who don't believe in your idea. You have a great idea, there'll be pushback. People say that cannot be done. Do you persevere? Yeah, you got to, right? But how do you engage with them? You got to understand their experience too. And at some point in your career, you're going to have an identity crisis. I've had mine. You know, you start off as an engineer, you know what you're doing, but all these revolutions happen, and you're looking at completely different technology, or even in your professional life. So I remember when I grew from individual contributor as an engineer to becoming a manager. And for a while, I'm a manager, but I'm an engineer. I would like do both roles, play both roles for a long time. And then I had to accept the fact, like, I'm a manager now, like, which is a little bit different from being an engineer. They're related, but there is a sense of who am I? You're going to have that. Is this the right job for me? Is this the right track that I want to be on? Is this the right company for me? These are all questions that will be part of that upheaval in this process, in this rapidly changing disruptive market. And of course, you're going to have your successes, right? Like success is great. I've had mine. Built compilers, shipped big production compilers. I remember GP Coder was which is like this compiler to compile MATLAB to CUDA, was a pretty big success for me. But interestingly, when you start to think about successes, you always have this idea that you have this dream and you want to achieve it, right? Like right now, you're probably thinking about something that you want to do and you're working really hard and you try really hard and you say like, oh, I'm all the rest of my life is kind of in tatters, but I'm set on this goal. I'm going to do it. I'm going to succeed. And you always have this thought that after you succeed, things will somehow be better at that time. And that's, I think, the biggest lie we tell ourselves. If you kind of work with this mentality that your life is somehow going to change after you get to a success, I think you're in for a lot of trouble. I've had successes in my professional life. And I said I played squash a lot. I used to play tournaments. I won big tournaments. And I remember after the end of a tournament, when I won a national tournament in the US. And at the end of it, I was like, this feels great. I had a party with my friends, but it felt hollow too. To me, success somehow feels hollow. And that's the thing about success, is that everybody takes it differently, or what you make out of it. I didn't feel like I learned a lot from success itself. On the other hand, I think failure is actually more important than success. I think everybody should make it a point that they try something really hard, something which is unachievable, and fail at it. You'll learn a lot more in the process of failure than you ever will with success. Those squash tournaments that I lost, I remember being so pissed off with myself. And I remember thinking about my form, my technique, what I did right, what I did wrong. And I think I was able to get better at my game because of the failure. Now, this is an interesting story. I don't know if this actually happened or not. Somebody told me this, and I really liked how it was said. Apparently, Thomas Edison, when he was inventing the electric bulb, he apparently he had to go through a lot of experiments till he was able to succeed. And apparently, a journalist asked him, "Oh, I heard you failed at creating the bulb about 2,000 times." And Edison said, "No, I didn't fail 2,000 times. It's a 2,000 step process," right? So you have to fail in order to succeed. And keep in mind, like a lot of people, you'll hear these quotes about if you're you gotta fail, and if you fail fast so that you can succeed. Sure, that's true. And if you think about it, the difference between science and engineering is science gives you a sense of reality as it is. Engineering is all about failure. You don't get it right. You keep doing it. You keep doing it, doing it till you get it right. And that's what engineering is. So failure is very important, and don't be afraid of failure. In fact, embrace failure and you'll become a better engineer and a better person through failure. Power relations. We can keep talking about this. You're going to have bosses who you don't agree with. You're going to have people who tell you what to do, and there's a power relationship there. And you might tell someone what to do if you're a manager at some point. That would be a difficult. You have to really be cautious in these relations. I'm not going to get into it too much, but it's something to remember. Is again going back to people and opinions and how you engage with the people that you're working with. So putting it all together, if you take the kind of the industrial revolution, all the people think, the life in the professional life is quite complicated. And you also might be going through your own things at home. You might be having a family. I myself went through a divorce and I had a lot of deaths in my family. I had a lot of things to deal with, right? Now, a lot of people try to separate work and life, and I think that's fair. But sometimes you want to think about how you can harmonize the two. If you think about work as something that you do for a living, paying your rent, you might want to rethink that. Why are you working? Why are you doing the job that you're doing? Is there a passion for it? And if there is a passion for it, then it's part of your life itself. So find a way to combine this yin and yang kind of way of combining the two to get to a place of harmony. So let's kind of step back. So the title of this talk is Existentialism in the Tech World. So what is existentialism? Why I want to talk about it? So let me just read this dictionary definition, right? A philosophical movement that stresses the individual's unique position as a self-determining agent responsible for making meaningful, authentic choices in a universe seen as purposeless or irrational. Existentialism is associated especially with Heidegger, Jaspers, these philosophers, and is opposed to philosophical rationalism and empiricism. A mouthful of words, right? What I take out of existentialism is a few things. It gives us, it stresses the subjective experience. That is, like, it is as opposed to objectivism, it is about subjective experience of each individual. It's the individual's responsibility of how they engage with society as a whole. And that's what existentialism is. You have this idea that existence comes before essence. And essence is in some sense your personality or who you are or how you define yourself to be. But you exist and therefore you have an essence. That's like this fundamental idea that it starts with the person and their engagement with the world. So it starts with the person. So it's always this idea of an existential angst means that you are disoriented in this world. So take all those revolutions and the disruptive world that we live in, there's an existential angst, like there's anxiety about how I would do it. I've felt this all the time. And existentialism is a way to make peace with your angst. How do you engage with this world? And the primary virtue of existentialism is authenticity. By authenticity, I mean it is who you are, which is your essence. But even before who you are and what you do is really strongly related with your existence itself, like how you engage. That if you are told to do something because you should be doing it, then you're not authentic. If you do it because you feel right about it and it is somehow completely connected with you and your reality and how you perceive the world, then that's authentic. And this is the single most thing I would say I would like to share with you is find a way to be authentic. Authenticity is the basis of living a life which you can make peace with, in my opinion, right? And authenticity, if you think about values and freedom, like, a lot of people think existentialism is about freedom because it's about the subjective experience that I have, and I want to be free in what I choose to do. Yeah, true. And then you have values, right? Like values which is maybe religious values or values of a person. Again, if you start with values as what drives you to do something, then you're not authentic. How you choose to be a person or engage with something defines your values. So existence comes first. But how do you know what you should be doing or who you are? What is your authentic self really is? What is that true self? And I believe in order to connect with that true self, you have to be right there with your feelings, your thoughts, your body, your mind. You have to be connected with yourself in order to understand what is your authentic self. And this brings me to a very a widely used term called mindfulness. And mindfulness, which is used in meditation and many other spheres, is a way to stay connected and notice who you are, and as you're existing, being connected with yourself. So you cannot be authentic if you're not mindful, because you don't know what your authenticity is. So mindfulness is your bridge to becoming authentic. And once you're authentic, once you're mindful and authentic, I think the world will take care of itself. So I want to start with that, right? Like, so now let's move to kind of what is. So, given you a very high level view of existentialism, I'd really encourage you to go and read up on it. It's a really interesting philosophy. It's a very recent philosophy. It started in the 19th century, really. But there are even older philosophies like Stoicism, which is like ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, which is very similar to this existential philosophy that your personal experience matters, mindfulness matters. Buddhism, another big one, right? Like predates even Christ, and there Buddhism really stressed mindfulness. Mindfulness and authenticity are really closely connected. And with that, you would get to compassion. Compassion is that connecting with the other. Once you're mindful, once you're authentic, try to understand the other person's experience. Compassion that you can bring to this other person's experience is really critical to how you might engage with the world. This to me is like the foundation. This is like the depth of where we live, where we come from, and that if you kind of get that right, how you engage with the world, the technology decisions, the career decisions you make will completely fall in place. I myself, like I said, I did this meditation retreat, and since then I've been meditating pretty much every day for the last 12 years, and it's been a huge change in my life. It has changed the way I engage with my wife when we were going through the divorce, and what technology choices I made. I became a meditation teacher, I became a yoga teacher for a while, and I cannot stress enough how much it has helped me with my life decisions as a whole, right? So kind of bringing it together, this is my last slide. I want to just leave you with this, which is some of the guiding principles for me, which is kind of what I hold closely to my heart. Be authentic. We've talked about this a lot. Like, use mindfulness, really know who you are and be authentic, and that's the best you can do, right? Like, if you see something in your workplace which you don't agree with, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep quiet? Are you going to let it slip? Especially if it's someone with a power relations, how are you going to handle that? Be authentic. You'll figure out what's the right way to do that. It's not like you have to go and make a noise about it, but you'll find a way to kind of be authentic and be true to yourself. Be curious. So this is back to that question of the adaptability. Adaptability comes from a place of curiosity. If you're curious and you have an adventurous spirit, then you're going to figure out how you're going to adapt. It just comes naturally. So I really, starting with curiosity is a huge step towards managing change. Be responsible, right? Like, this is just basic. And if you're authentic, I think it comes naturally. Be passionate. I can't stress enough how important that is too. Curiosity actually is related to passion, right? Like, if you have a passion for something, a hunger for something, things will just start to roll. I mean, I had a passion for compilers for the last 20 years. I still do. And it defines who I am in terms of what I do. So find your passion. Find your passion. Be curious. You'll figure out what's the right job or technology you want to engage with. And because you're always going to be working with people, compassion, again, is something I'd like to stress. It has helped me, like, when you see someone who looks like they're underperforming, they're not really doing their job as well as you think they should be doing, there might be something behind it. Maybe they're going through something at home, or maybe they're just struggling, they need some resources and support. Trying to understand their experience will help you engage better. Don't judge, first be compassionate. And finally, be vulnerable. And this is part of being ready to fail, right? You will not fail unless you make yourself vulnerable. You have to be open to the fact that you're going to fail. And if you fail, a lot of good things will happen. I don't think this is, you might not have expected to hear this line, but failure is good, and be vulnerable to allow yourself to fail. And finally, just be, right? This is the mindfulness aspect. Just be and watch who you are, what you are, and this will help you reconnect with yourself, with your authentic self, and thereby with what you do, who you do it with, where you do it with. All of this comes from this basic idea of just being, right? Which is just being who you are, that authentic true self. So with that, I want to kind of end here. I want to leave you with this quote from Steve Jobs, who was a great existentialist. And as you can see, he is talking about all of that authentic nature and this passion that is needed to let you do the job that you love most, right? So this authenticity, he says that he lived every day of his life like it was his last day. And what that meant is that he would look in the mirror every morning and ask himself, looking at the day he had ahead of him, is this what I want to be doing today? He would ask himself that question every day. And he said that if the answer was no for a few days in a row, then he knows that he's not doing what he wanted to do, and he might want to try to change something else. That is authenticity. You're coming from that place of feeling into yourself whether this is what you want to be doing. So thank you, everyone. This was a great experience. I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I did talking to you. I'll pause here, and I'm here. We have 10 minutes left, and I'm here for more questions. I'll keep watching the chat, so put in your questions in chat if you have more questions. So Asel asks, hey Girish, thanks for the amazing session. You mentioned that during your 20 years in tech, there were multiple evolutions, and what were the actions that you took to be up to date with the latest trends? This is a great question. Again, like I said, it comes from that place of curiosity. And for me personally, it was about reading papers, being interested. It starts with curiosity. I'll read a paper only because I'm interested and curious about it. So if you start with that curiosity, you'll find the technology and try to understand what's going on. I'd go to conferences, try to understand the changes and trends. So just immersing yourself in a place where this new technology is being talked about, something might click and might perk your curiosity, and then you go follow that. That's all I did. And if I start from there, it helped me kind of keep going. Fahim, thanks for joining, Fahim. And Fahim asks, thank you. On the topic of work-life balance, how to harmonize what you have to do and what you'd like to do? That's a great question. Yeah, we get asked to do things, right? Like we get asked to do things, and you have to do something, but you'd like to do something else. And this is actually, it's a great question. If I think back, yes, I have been asked to do something because that's just the way it is. And I think I'd go back to what just described about like what Steve Jobs said. For me, it is really important that I do something because I want to do it. It goes back to that authenticity that we talked about. My authentic self will want to do what I like to do, right? And if I really believe that what I like to do is what I want to do, then I need to make a strong case for why I should be doing it. And I'm going to present that case to the people around me and say why I should not be doing what I'm told to do, but why I should be doing this other thing. And if they are authentic too, there's a good match, and you might have a very pragmatic conversation, and things might change. If not, you might have to change, right? Like if you want to stay authentic and you realize that others around you are not listening and be compassionate to what you want to do, you have to think about it. Like, do you want to stay there? Do you want to move on? Those are some of the hard decisions that I think you will have to make in the end of the day. Um, that's my thought. But yeah, but please don't stay silent because you don't believe in what you're asked to do and you think you should be doing something else. Don't be quiet about it. You should at least have a conversation and come from your true, authentic space to describe why you want to be doing this other thing. So I have another question from Akshika. How do you think your upbringing in India impacted your success in the USA? That's an interesting question. That's a very personal question. Personally, I feel it gives me diversity, right? Like if I grew up in the same place and I took up a job in the same place, then my horizons are somehow limited. Growing up in India exposed me to the pains and the struggles of people there, and also the pleasures and joys of what I see in India. In US, it's different, right? So it gives me pause when I engage with people and my work in trying to think about a diverse perspective. So it's really important to open up your view, include people, and be more diverse. And I think that's the biggest thing I got out of growing up in India and working in the US. I could say like maybe India we were so focused on like making it because everybody was poor when I was growing up, and you had to make it in order to kind of not be poor, and that gave us a lot of discipline, right? But that's just a moment in time. I think that can change. That can happen anywhere. So I don't think it's India or US. I think being in two different places really helps from a diversity perspective, and that's why I travel too. And travel helped me broaden my horizons even further. I hope I answered your question, Akshika. That's just my personal opinion on that. I'll wait if there are any more questions. All right. So thank you very much, Pramodini, Asel, and the rest of the SEF group. I really enjoyed joining you today, and thanks for listening. And I wish everyone the best of luck for whatever they want to do. Remember, stay authentic and feel into who you are. Be mindful, get into your authenticity, and engage with compassion and curiosity, and everything else will fall in place. Thank you.